Bill Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton, at Georgetown University, was a history professor, a professor of international government named Quigley. The first name, Roland. Oh, he's not there. I think his name's Carol Quigley. Well, the book's available to get. Quigley was a historian's historian, and his reputation to this day is of the very highest. But I know the only people who ever hear of him are professional historians there. Quigley wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. If you get a copy of this book, you're in the hands of a scholar, and you've got 1,300 pages ahead of you of small print, dense pages, but I guarantee you will never be the same when you emerge on the other side. So rather than think of this as a way to oppress the poor, think of it this way. Once Charles Darwin wrote his second famous book, not Origin of Species, but The Descent of Man, which was published in England a little bit before this and in the United States in 1871, Darwin refined his theory of evolution. I hope you all know that Darwin was not an academic professor. What Darwin thought got circulated in drawing rooms all over the world before any academics heard of this. And Darwin's second famous book, Descent of Man, introduced into the community of the powerful in Europe and the United States as profound an idea as I've ever been able to track in human history. It was simply this: not everyone is evolving. A very small fraction of the human race is evolving. Everybody else is an evolutionary dead end. He particularly fingered the Irish, but you know, he spread around is an evolutionary dead end, and the principle he had discovered scientifically was that if evolutionarily advanced stock crossbred with the dead ends, that evolution would march backwards into the swirling mists of the dawnless past. There. Well, suppose you were a person of substance, or even a leading academic, and you had taken the burden of civilization on your shoulders, and you knew that 95% of the human race were dead ends. But now, what would be incumbent on you to do as a responsible person if you thought most people could ruin this march toward human perfection? Well, when Andrew Carnegie, but a lot of people, cooked up different additions to this plan. One of the things that was cooked up was to have forced institutional schooling that layered people so that they competed with one another, and the good breeding stock could be reserved at the very top of that pyramid, and usually in elite private boarding schools is where it's reserved. But there are some segments of public schools where it's reserved. Everybody else is set against each other's throats with these microscopic differences measured by completely invalid tests. I hope that's the right statistical word. But what I mean is the tests don't actually measure what they say they measure. If the tests say, for example, that you're a brilliant reader, it's almost predictable that you're not a brilliant reader. What you can do is go to a reading selection, and with 6, 7, or 8 kinds of information, you can quickly gloss the section, remove that piece of information, and check something on a multiple choice test. If anyone asks you a complex question about their reading selection, you don't know what they're talking about. They can answer factual questions, but they can't answer questions that ask them to gauge the significance or the relationship of characters. Anything that requires what we might call higher order thinking, they can't answer. They can retrieve bits of information and check it off on a checklist. A portion of their brains had been removed. How? By increasing the frequency of these tests from first grade on to the point where what passed for an education was doing well on these tests, and maybe in a secondary sense, getting a pat on the head from the teacher, having the teacher call your little hand and wiggle in the air until somebody else is there. But nothing replaced doing well on those tests. So, as anybody with a good mind would do, even if they're not sure what's going on, they deduce the right strategy to follow. Why waste your time reflecting on things when you're only going to be asked these 6 or 7 kinds of information over and over and over again, right through college? And if you do well, your parents and other people, authorities tell you, well, there are places reserved for you, and eventually a place is reserved in medical school. Darwin says it's ordained by biology. You can't escape the slot you're put in, and if you try to escape, you'll pollute the person in the upper rank. They won't drag you up, you'll drag them down, and eventually, if enough people do that, all history will reverse itself and march backward, and it's already happening in Ireland. You didn't like the argument. Among the ways that's done is to stratify very strictly schooling, to keep kids in schooling long enough that their ties to other forms of strength, their community, their tradition, their parents, or older brother, are so weakened that the authority, first in the form of a school teacher and a principal, and then in the form of all the voices who give orders, the people don't know how to bulk authority. And you show them enough examples of people whose lives were destroyed by doing that, that fear is the fuel that runs the evolutionarily retarded, keeping themselves in place forever. Now, this case is presented. It's not presented as succinctly as I said. You put this together like a mosaic from this event and that event and this event that doesn't, no one of which seem to make any sense. It's when they're all together and seen as a way to order the management of the human race and make it predictable, then you see that it's a tool of management theory, that some people learn to do higher order numbers and higher order literacies is necessary. Those people will be, if they're behaving themselves, they'll be vested with transmitting this to the next generation. But that most of us must be kept ignorant of the plan, addicted to punching buttons or watching television, addicted to our simple pleasures of pizza and a gallon of beer, and then we go to sleep and wake up and we punch buttons, is necessary to manage the kind of economy that these people created.